All right, Chris, I think we are officially live. How you doing over there today, Chris?
Absolutely no complaints. It's a lovely day
Yep.
here in Metro Boston.
There you go. Great to hear. It's a lovely day up here in Calgary, Canada as well. I'm not sure if you knew that. I'm actually from Canada, but
Yeah. I was there
yes.
not too long ago. I was in Edmonton.
You're in Edmonton. Oh, that's super close to me. So there you go. I'm in Calgary. So it's the better city in Alberta is Calgary, but so I'm sorry you had to go to Edmonton. Thank you very much for joining us here today, Chris. I know you have a lot of expertise in the Gen AI and AI world. I know right before we even got on this call, we were talking about making our own HawkSearch theme song together. But maybe if there's time at the end, we can do it. What do you think? Awesome. And Chris, do you mind giving an introduction?
Sure. My name is Christopher Penn. I'm the co-founder and chief data scientist at TrustInsights.ai. We're a management consulting firm that focuses on helping companies do more with their data, and these days do more with the AI tools that everyone really likes, but wasn't really sure how to get the most out of them. So today we're going to be talking about HawkSearch. Kyle, you're going to be talking a lot about HawkSearch and its capabilities, and then we're going to dig into where the stuff is right now and where it's going.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kyle Mitzner. I head up the customer success team here at Bridgeline and with HawkSearch. I've kind of bounced around. I've been in a lot of different departments in HawkSearch. In the product team, I've been in the service team. Finally landed my way over here in customer success. But I think the experience from all those different groups really helps me to understand sort of full circle the customer journey and customer experience. And then obviously we're going to talk a lot about generative AI today. So hopefully we can kind of round that all out together. And just to level set a tiny bit here, Chris, I think you know this, I'm good at the search part of things. We have a lot of team members in HawkSearch that know a lot more than I do when it comes to Gen AI. But I'm super excited for the chat today. I think it'll be really fun. And I think we can bounce some pretty cool ideas off each other. What do you think?
Sounds like a plan to me.
Awesome. And this one's kind of a fun one, Chris. So, and maybe you are aware of this, maybe you're not aware of it, but sort of the long-term history of search. And one thing that's always fun is to kind of level set on where a product or where a platform or where search in this case came from to better understand sort of the trajectory and its future. So of course, this started way back in 1760. We had index cards, obviously were made for books. And I have a feeling the term indexing, if you're familiar with it, I'm assuming at least it came from index cards way back in 1760. One really cool thing is when we started to really move forward, I think this was kind of around the same time frame when we started to think about AI in general. But the hyperlink, it was a scientist that was mad at finding data, and he envisioned these libraries with all these connected annotations, which is kind of cool. And then to kind of double back on the whole Canada thing, Chris, Veronica was the first well-documented search, and it was produced in Canada. And there might have even been one that's called Archie, but there's this whole series of Archie comic books releases, and they were all named after Archie comic books. It was kind of funny. And then, of course, we got into the search engine phase, like the Yahoo, Google, Ask Jeeves, all those.
So you're missing something on here.
Am I missing something?
Yes. In 1984, Apple released the Macintosh.
Okay.
And one of the killer apps on the Macintosh at the time was a piece of software called HyperCard, which was index cards with live links. And so people could build educational experiences with clickable links that carried them from part to part in the document.
Right. So it's kind of a combination of the 1760, 1945 thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. All right. Well, we're going to have to add that one in because that's a real winner, isn't it?
That's right.
That's great to know. I'm very impressed, Chris. You're very up to speed on your search understanding. So that's
because I'm a nerd. Ask me anything about pop culture and I'm a loss.
Okay. We won't ask you too many pop culture questions today. Maybe one at the end for fun, but really, you know, if we kind of advance past that, 1995, the Google, the site search, or the search engine phase, we start to realize that search is becoming one of the core pillars of really any website. And a good commerce search experience leads to more sales and ultimately more revenue. And then now, by incorporating Gen AI in an effective manner, we can really start to capitalize on user interactions.
Yep. The thing about search too is that it's evolved and this is timeline is really great. It went from I have to make the index myself, right, to machines can help me make the index, to machines can provide me with resources when I ask for it. And then it really in the 2010s is when you start to see search engines like Google start to do much more sophisticated ranking with AI, with classical AI. And then get to the point where today you have things like TikTok where the algorithms are so sophisticated that instead of you having to go out and get something, they deliver it to you. They say, we're pretty sure you're going to like this. So the For You page is like, it's an evolution of search that now generative AI is getting into the business of with OpenAI's Search GPT, where it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is what you're actually are thinking about. And we are now at a point where search is the act of searching is now the act of conversation.
Absolutely. And such good perspective there. And there's a lot coming down the pipe, and there's a lot of things that we're still using today that we were using 10 years ago as well, even within HawkSearch. And I don't think some of those things are going to go away anytime soon, but it's really cool to see the roadmap of where search has been and where it's going to go to. And Chris, what I'll do is I'll cover some of these sort of key advancements in HawkSearch. HawkSearch has been around for quite a while now, and we've gone through a few phases of machine learning. The new phase is really about leveraging both machine learning and generative AI to provide the best possible outcomes for user experiences. The absolute sort of key takeaway for HawkSearch users is how we leverage these functionalities. So HawkSearch is sort of defining Gen AI search a little bit differently than some of the other vendors in the space, but the key thing is that we're not really just sending a button to a customer, but we're allowing the customer to dictate how it works and how they have the ability to still merchandise on top of it. And the key thing is it's not a black box where you sort of get the worst of both worlds. And one key takeaway is responsible AI as well. And I'm sure you're kind of I'm sure you have a lot of input on that just in general, but the key part was it's not a black box where you have no control over anything.
One of the things that is so important about Gen AI powered search, and it's one of the reasons why like HawkSearch's ability to ingest customer catalogs is important, is grounding. So this concept of grounding, which is essentially saying, we know that hallucination, aka making things up, is not something that is an accident in generative AI models. If you have ever, I don't know that you ever have, but if you've ever built your own generative AI model and tested it before it was tuned, you would know this thing 100% of what comes out of it is hallucinations, just made up stuff.
Yeah.
And what responsible vendors are doing today is saying, okay, well, these tools are really good interpreters. They're good writers. They're not very good at factual information because of the nature of the underlying architecture. But if we have an existing data catalog, say, of customer products and SKUs and product descriptions and things, then when a model is asked, hey, help me find, this particular part or device or type, it can go into the customer's database and say, what things match most closely here first before I go into my long-term memory, which is trained on the public internet. And that process for a lot more safety, brand safety, customer experience safety, where it's like, oh, it found a product that actually exists. Good job.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the way we're typically handling the Gen AI, I mean, we'll get into concept and visual and image search in a second, but it's actually all within the customer product catalog. There's nothing that's reaching out yet to the internet to generate responses and relevancy for our customers. Now we'll get into agentic and smart search, smart response in a second here. It's a little bit different, but and how AI is transforming search, at least for us. I mean, personalization, that's been one of the core pillars of search in general for the last number of years. It's all about collecting data and comparison to customer product data, that type of thing. So where are users going? What are they clicking on? What have they added to cart? What did they buy? Those are all signals that are coming into search. And that's how we can start to personalize and tune relevancy based on that. So that part's been there for a while. The three concepts that we sort of abide by within personalization, maybe abide's not the best word, but the three pillars of what we talk about is we have the wisdom of the crowd. So what are the users in general doing? We have wisdom of the content, which is what products do you have on your site, or which content pieces do you have on your site? And then the final one, of course, is the wisdom of the user. Have you ever heard those terms before? Did I just make those completely up, Chris?
It's, if you think about it, in some ways, it kind of maps back to H.J. Leavitt's Diamond Framework from 1964, which evolved to things like the common refrain: people, process, technology. You have what people want and what their behaviors are. You have the content itself, right? And then you have ways of addressing that content. So it's the people, it's the platform of the content, and then the process by which people search, things like past history interactions. And if you combine those three things, you will get better personalization. This has been true in personalization for 20 years. It's also one of the reasons why most personalization sucks, because most people don't apply all three pillars. Instead, what they do is they go, hey, first name, and that's it. Like, that's the extent of the personalization. It does not incorporate people, process, technology.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Great. That's a great perspective on it. That's for sure. Chris, we do have some newer features that have come out this year. We still have obviously a bit of a roadmap as well, but our concept, visual, and image search is very interesting, and this is where a lot of our users are getting really excited. A lot of our customers are getting really excited. We're leveraging a RAG model for concept, visual, and image search. The key thing with the on-site search is that we're using the customer data, like I mentioned before, and that's sort of it. So we're taking products, we're taking content, and we're mapping it to a vector. And then we're taking a user query, mapping that to a vector, and then how do they match? And what is the closest match within that vector database?
Mm-hmm. The thing that makes that useful is when you, as the user, don't have the words to describe something. So take a look at this lovely thing, right?
Interesting.
You're like,
okay.
Exactly. What is that? Like, what in the world is this thing? This is, by the way, a shoulder harness for a GoPro, so that you can have a GoPro on you without you having to hold it. If you are the user and you've got this thing, or you're trying to buy something like this, like, I don't know how, I don't have the words to describe what this looks like, or maybe I do have the words and I shouldn't say them aloud in public places. Whatever the thing is, when you're using visual search or concept search, then you can say, okay, here's the thing. You tell me what it is, and then what should I buy with it? Right? So it could then say, well, hey, you might want this extension arm to plug into the harness so that your GoPro can be elevated above your head, and we're not seeing the side of your head for the entirety of the video.
I love it. I'm not sure I could come up with words to describe that. Which might be a good reason to use image search, because that might be a better way to find that product. Because like I mentioned, I'm not sure I could describe that very well, and I might get some pretty fun results to come back. All right, and then we have our agentic search, our smart response as well. And this is one that you probably can help me with even more so. Obviously, this one gets a little bit outside of the RAG model. And we're generating smart responses to help, really to help guide the user. Maybe it's in a purchase journey, or maybe it's through a content website, but helping guide them with smart responses and sometimes what we're doing is pulling like a category or like a facet to the top of the search, right below the search bar, and really trying to help the customer get to where they need to go. And then agentic search, I'm sure you probably can explain even better than I can.
Well, agentic search is one of those things where you have essentially your own. Think about like real estate. In real estate, you have a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, right? The seller's agents work with the seller to try and sell the house for as much money as possible, and the buyer's agent tries to find the buyer a house that meets all their criteria at the lowest possible price. And the two have to kind of battle it out to see, okay, can we negotiate a price and a closing date and all these things that go into that particular type of complex sale. Agentic purchasing or agentic AI in general is very similar to that, in that you would have your own AI agent and then would have it go and interact with other agents. You've already seen primitive versions of this today. If you have an Amazon Alexa, you can say, Alexa, buy me this thing, right? The old joke is Jeff Bezos once told Alexa to buy a copy of the Washington Post, and it accidentally bought the entire thing for him. But agentic search is about how do we take it to that same level of interaction that, for example, TikTok does, where it's like, okay, I'm going to anticipate what you need and I'm going to present it to you so you don't have to search. Like you now, again, a really good example is if you have an Amazon device, it will say, hey, you bought this product and we know this product has an average refill rate of this many days. So on this day, I'm going to say, hey, do you need to buy more of that thing? And it's anticipating whether or not you need to buy the thing or not. Now, what's interesting about agentic search and agentic agent-based AI is that we are going to see individuals, humans will have access to agents. If you watched the WWDC keynote with Apple, you saw the new and enhanced version of Siri, where it actually has some intelligence now, and a lot of on-device AI. Siri can look at what's on your screen and say, hey, I think you're trying to do this. Here it is. So individuals will have buying capabilities through their agents. Then vendors will need to have agents available to interface with the buyer agents to say, hey, it looks like you're yet another Siri, and it looks like you want to do this thing, and your user has said, come do this thing. And then a company like HawkSearch would have a customer agent that would say, here, Siri, talk to this agent on our side, and let's negotiate and get the user the things they want. And the user doesn't have to do any of that, right? The user's just like, hey, I want to buy this thing, and it will go out and do the thing, and it will come back and say, here's your purchase options. What do you want?
Yeah. And it sort of becomes your new best salesperson on the website, doesn't it?
Exactly. The short-term thing we tell everyone to do today, if you want to get ready for agentic purchasing, is your website, your web property, no matter what it is, had better be compatible with a screen reader, right? So if your site works really well for the visually impaired today, it will work great with AI agents tomorrow, because they're essentially doing the same thing as a screen reader. If your website does not work with a screen reader, or it's a miserable experience for a visually impaired person today, AI agents are not going to be able to just to buy tomorrow. And so you'd obviously want to use tools like HawkSearch to provide more compatible, visually impaired compatibility. But also, if you just get your site ready today by making it compatible with screen readers and make it a first-class experience for someone with visual impairment, AI will have no trouble using it tomorrow. And as we see with things like Google's Core Web Vitals in Search Console, Google and other companies prefer accessible, fast environments. And so you will do your brand a service getting ready for this. And oh, by the way, the 10 to 15% of people who are visually impaired today will also be more likely to buy from you today if you get your site ready that way.
Yep, that's a perfectly great point. And one thing that we find with our customers, Chris, is, we have these great features. Obviously, personalization, been around for a while. Concept, visual, image search, it's pretty new. Agentic search, smart response, it's all pretty new. Now, one thing that our customers have a challenge is, how does this all come together in the front end? So how do we direct customers to the right experiences? How do we know if this query might be a keyword search or it might be a concept search? And then obviously we do have a product release coming out in the fall, Chris, that helps to resolve this. So we're going to combine this into one search bar experience. Have you seen other customers, other website owners that have a challenge with implementing AI features in the front end, Gen AI features?
You mean like all of Google, where
Yeah.
Google is putting Gemini into everything and everywhere they possibly can, even when it makes absolutely no sense to do so. Like
Right.
there, you just see like, I don't know that a language model belongs in this environment when the task that you're doing is not a language task. Like there's a Gemini implementation in Google Sheets. AI language models do language. Mathematics is not a language. And so it's probably not the best place to be there. As opposed to, in Google Docs, that's perfectly fine. So one of the things that we have to be careful about as companies, as innovators, is using the tools to their strengths. Like when someone searches, that is a language task, but there's a lot of symbology that goes on behind the scenes, as you know, with concept search and visual search. And so we want to make sure that we're pairing the technologies with the task and not just assuming that a generative AI model can do everything, because it really can't.
Yeah. And one key thing to understand too, with our customer base, with the HawkSearch customer base, we have a lot of B2C customers. We have a lot of B2B customers. And if you look at how B2B customers search, you're probably well aware, but a lot of them are just entering in specific SKU numbers. There's absolutely no reason to hit a concept search query with a SKU number. Keyword search can find it just fine. But where we can start to help with the user experience is maybe have other signals that help us decipher whether we should be sending that query to a keyword search or a concept search. And there could be a couple signals, like even the length of characters. How many characters have been entered into the search bar? Do you have any other examples or any other ideas on how you could switch that signal from a keyword search to a concept search?
Well, so I think you've hit on a really important point, and that is that you need to have some level of routing, right? So, and this is true if you use the web interface for Chat GPT, if you use it for Gemini or whatever, there is a router that the user can't see that tries to determine what is the task and then where do we route that. So if someone's doing like a SKU search, you're right, you don't need a language model. It's a waste of compute resources to do that. On the other hand, if you get a very, very unclear query, then architecturally, like, well, maybe we should pass this to a language model or to a vision model to see what it is that we can do to meet the user where they are. And so for companies, they need to be thinking very clearly about what kind of routing model do we need that way, A, you're not sending queries and hits to things that it's the wrong tool. And two, generative AI in particular is very, very resource intensive, right? It's very compute heavy. It's very expensive. I was running a job on Google Gemini earlier this month, and it was a relatively small job, 1,400 API calls, which is not a ton. And I was using Gemini Flash, which is the cheaper of their models. It was still $2 of stuff. Now, that's one user for 1 hour doing one task. If you have 1,000 users, 10,000 users, suddenly that $2 bill gets very large very fast. So you want to make sure that you are being very smart about how you allocate user queries.
Absolutely. And to that same point, I mean, obviously resources are expensive, and simple keyword query is pretty light in terms of resources, in terms of server necessity, whereas the concept search is very, it can be very heavy in terms of resources. So definitely having a router, was that the term, Chris?
Yeah, a query router up front.
Query router, yes. Of course, we've done it with a few customers. We have a couple ways to do it. Actually, our product team right now is working on something we're calling the bridge, and maybe it's maybe letting the cat out of the bag a tiny bit, but part of its job is to route queries to the correct. Are we going to route it to the keyword search? Or are we going to route it to a vector database? How are we going to route this query, and what makes sense? And those configurations really need to be heavily modified based on the customer that's using it.
Exactly. A lot of companies are doing things with small language models, models that are under 1 billion parameters, where they're fine tuning them for very specific use cases. So a company like HawkSearch, for example, would take tens of thousands of customer logs and essentially train a model or train an adapter on a model that would do that routing. Like the model it's like a dog. You've trained it to do one thing really well, so it can sniff explosives, but not earthquake victims. And then that's what it does. And so that becomes part of your routing infrastructure. And because it's such a small model, it's computationally very efficient to do that. And then you can pass off the really complex stuff where the model's like, I don't know what to do with this. So you send it to a big model that has a bigger price tag.
Yep. There you go. And I think the goal overall, just to wrap up that last slide, but the goal overall is to understand complex user requests, improve their relevance, and then personalize the response.
Yep, exactly. At the end of the day, if the customer gets what they want and it's not a net loss for you, then you did your job.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. So practical applications of AI, enhancing search capabilities and business strategies. I've talked quite a bit about HawkSearch. Of course, we'll continue to talk about HawkSearch, but in general, was there anything that kind of comes to mind, especially around business strategies?
Well, this is the thing. In generative AI in particular, people are still in the I need to see use cases to even understand what the capabilities of these tools are. And because they're so flexible, a language model is good at language. Well, what is language? Right? Language applies to almost every role in your company. It applies to almost every job, almost every task. And so trying to figure out where do you even use AI? Where does it make sense to use a language model or a vision model is one of the hardest things for people to do, to even say, okay, I didn't even know this was possible. I'll give you an example. The other day, I took all of my city's ordinances and I put them into a language model. And I said, pretend our mayor is an unethical mayor. How could he weaponize some of these ordinances to discriminate against marginalized populations? And it gave me a long list of this ordinance could be misused this way. This ordinance could be misused this way and stuff. And then I said, great, rewrite these ordinances. And then I sent them on to my city representative to say, I would like to petition the city to amend our laws this way. People were like, oh, I'm going to make a blog post with ChatGPT. Like, yeah, that's like taking a Harrier to the grocery store. It can do that, and it does it well. But that is just a tiny sliver of a fraction of the things that these tools are capable of. And part of our role as innovators, as technologists, is to say, what else can you do that these tools enable that maybe you couldn't do in the past because there was just no way to do it?
Absolutely. And to go back to that just a little bit, Chris, I think I mentioned to you before, a lot of our customers struggle on the data side, right? So when we import data into HawkSearch, we often do quite a few, we'll say, fun things to make sure that data is good enough so that we can query against it. For those businesses that do struggle with data, do you have any recommendations?
Get your data clean. I mean, that's something we've only been saying for the last 70 years.
Yeah.
And yet that doesn't happen. One of the things, for example, that is incredibly valuable that people just don't do is in your sales CRM, right? You have people who are sales professionals. Updating Salesforce is their least favorite pastime. And as a result, the data quality in, say, the notes field in Salesforce is appalling. What if instead of making people do that, they simply left voicemail or voice memo and a language model interpreted it and reformatted and put it in the correct place? That's an example where a language model is taking language, rewriting it, and putting it where it's supposed to be. If you have a product catalog and that product catalog is a hot mess, you'd first do standard cleaning. Is this, for example, are the SKUs the correct alphanumeric format? Did somebody accidentally put emoji in the SKU field? Things like that. And then going through and saying, okay, well, let's look at the product descriptions. one of the exercises that would, I think, be extremely valuable for customers of HawkSearch would be to take your product catalog, take an ideal customer profile of who your buyers are, and run every product in your catalog, its description, against the ideal customer profile and say, does this product description resonate with our ideal customer, or is this going to turn them off? Is this going to confuse them? Is this going to cause more trouble than it's worth? And then in a separate query, say, how would you rewrite this for this customer? And if you do that, then your data's cleaner. You'll probably get rid of like your random misspellings and things in the product catalog. But more importantly, you will then pass back into a system like HawkSearch clean data that is tuned for the customer and what they want.
Love it. I love it. It's such a good idea. And one thing, just to go back to the actual search part of it. So one key difference between what we would turn on for a keyword field, for example, if a customer gives us an index and we want to query based on keywords, the first thing we don't do is turn on long description. We do not want to query a long description, for example, because what happens is we get erroneous results, you get weird matches, and then it takes a long time to actually run the search query. What I find is kind of interesting when we switch to a concept search is it's kind of the opposite. You maybe want to obviously include like the title or the name field of a product, but you definitely want to include the long description. And so what you're kind of saying with it on the data side is almost modifying that long description, or maybe even making a second one to help with relevancy on a generative AI search response.
Exactly. Even going so far as to say, here's my ideal customer profile. Here's the product and all the data we have about it. What additional terms that are not currently in either the keywords or the long description, what additional terms would our ideal customer likely use to search for this product? And then inferring additional fields that could be used to improve search.
Absolutely. I love it. And the kind of the approach is like on both sides, right? Is we want to make sure our data is clean. We want to make sure it's relevant to our customers. And then we want search to find that data and present the most relevant terms, whether it's in a keyword or a vector search.
Yeah. And one of the things that people also need to be careful of is when you're doing things like vector databases. So if you're not as technical a person, retrieval augmented generation and vector databases, if you can imagine a chef in a kitchen, retrieval augmented generation is like adding another pantry with more ingredients, different ingredients. If the chef doesn't know what to do with them, adding more ingredients doesn't help anything, right? So when you hear people talking about fine tuning, that's like giving the chef a new cookbook or teaching the chefs, okay, you're a French chef here. Now we're going to learn how to make sushi. Then when you put sushi ingredients in the pantry, the chef knows what to do with them. So you need to have both of those approaches. You can't just throw more data at the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, IT and marketing folks have been doing that for 70 years, and it never solves the problem.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. So we need cookbooks, and then we can pass them the ingredients.
Exactly. So it's if the chef knows how to cook that cuisine and they just don't have the ingredients, you give them the ingredients, then you're good to go. If the chef doesn't know how to cook that cuisine, then adding more ingredients isn't going to help.
There you go. There you go. So responsible AI applications. Is there anything else that comes to mind for I guess business strategies around search?
For business strategies around search, the thing I would strongly recommend, and again, this is something we do for our clients all the time, is taking your ideal customer profile and asking it, what are the things that this customer is going to search for? Right?
Yeah.
What are the things, because in a good ideal customer profile, we build ours using customer data. You say, what are the needs? What are the pain points? What are the goals? What are the motivations of this customer? Why would they be buying? How do they decide who to buy from? And when you build a robust profile, a generative AI model can simulate that customer very, very effectively. And so if you're building a business strategy around search, part of it had better be, what is our customer likely to search for? Now, if you've already got things like focus group information, like interviews you've done with customers, and you know how they think, feed that to a generative tool, and then you can have it audit your current business strategies around search, audit your current keywords or your tagging or your taxonomy, and say, this is not aligned. This is not how your customer is going to behave.
Yeah. And Chris, one thought that comes to mind with that, obviously we have a lot of tracking in HawkSearch. We need to know who's searching on what. We have keyword tracking, we have like facet tracking, but I think in addition to understanding the ideal customer profile, maybe it's worth taking like the top 250 keywords from HawkSearch and pumping that into a Gen AI model and seeing what we get back. Can that even help form the ideal customer profile, the ICP?
It can. Yeah, it can. I mean, think about it. If you have, it'll create a behavioral profile, which is actually very useful. So, for example, a lot of people build profiles on demographics, and demographics are not necessarily a very good predictor of market. There is the famous kids toy, My Little Pony, right? If you go by demographics, you think 8 to 14-year-old girls, that's who we're selling this to. If you look at behavior and say just who's buying, you would say, I want to focus on this cluster of top buyers, and and Rainbow Dash and Princess Pony or whatever. I don't know the names of the characters. These are our top sellers. Let's make sure they're bundled together. You would know that from your search data. If you then reverse engineer that, you would find that men 26 to 40 are actually your most largest buyers, because of the whole bronies phenomenon. And so your demographic profile would be wrong in the sense that you're missing a lucrative market. But if you reverse engineer from a behavioral profile, you will catch the most valuable buyers, no matter who they are.
I love it. So now we have the ICP part of it, and then we have a behavioral profile that we can start to generate right out of HawkSearch, and then use that behavioral profile to help ensure relevancy in search results, which is really cool.
Yep.
Really cool. Really, really cool. All right, Chris, I think this one's mostly on you. What do you got for me when it comes? We already talked about agents a little bit. We've already talked about complex decisions and how machine learning is going to take over the world. But do you have any other insights or trends that you can think of off the top of your head? If it relates to search, that's great. But this interaction with agents is probably the key point to focus on.
Agentic AI is one of those things that, yes, the ability for machines to behave even semi-autonomously. So, for example, one of the things that we were talking about just before we came on here was, can even today's models behave semi-autonomously? And the answer is yes, with proper good prompting. Today's Chat GPT can do that. If we can bring up the screen share that I have running here on screen. This is what we did as an example. I said, here's the slides that you sent over literally 10 minutes before we went on the air. And I have a custom GPT that will read this and generate candidate seed questions for a webinar. Then it has built into the prompt itself a scoring rubric to say, hey, here are the criteria for what makes a good seed question. The machine independently scores the questions it wrote, analyzes them, says, hey, I think I did a good job on some of these, a bad job on some of these, and then makes refinements of the winners, then scores the refinements, and then ultimately spits out, here is the top 10 seed questions that a webinar like this would want to have. This is, I realize we didn't do this live, but Kyle and Kristen from HawkSearch watched this happen in real time. This was not something that we took days to put together. This ran in real time. This is what we mean when I talk about things like semi-autonomous AI. Today, you can build tooling that will evaluate its own responses against the things you care about and take action on it. Say, I'm going to do, I didn't do a good job of this. Let me try again, and so on and so forth. But people have got to understand that generative AI prompting, which is the very baseline, the starting point for all this, is a form of programming. It's a form of programming, except instead of C# or Java or Python, it's English or Danish or Ukrainian, but it's still coding. And if you think like a coder, if you think, oh, I could have if-then loops, I have controls, loop conditions, etc., then I know how to make these tools behave in ways that are incredibly valuable to me or to my customers. So that's one really important trend. That's a today thing. After you're done watching this webinar, go and try this out today of building semi-autonomous prompts that machines can just run. The other thing that I think is really important to understand about today's language models is they are woefully undertrained. So Andre Karpathy, co-founder of OpenAI, was talking about how these models, when they are built, how long the training goes on, how thorough the training is.
Mhm.
And he said something very interesting. He said, today's state-of-the-art models are undertrained by between 10x and 100x. If you had no new data, no new information, but you just had either more GPU clusters or longer training time, the model performance would continue to improve by orders of magnitude until you reach convergence. And he said, we are nowhere close. So today's state-of-the-art models that people are like, oh, this is amazing. It has these things, it can do these things. You're working with half-baked AI, right? This is something Professor Ethan Mollick from Wharton says a lot. Today's AI is the worst AI you will ever use, right? Tomorrow it's better, and the day after that it's better. We saw this, 3 weeks ago when Meta released Llama 3.1. They released a state-of-the-art model, gave it away, and said anyone can run this, and that was such a huge change because it means that anyone now can run state-of-the-art models themselves if they have the hardware to support it. So that's I guess a third trend I would point people towards is that we are getting to a period now where open models that are being given away by their creators, are competitive on state-of-the-art benchmarks, and they are so good that if you have the compute infrastructure, you can run them in your company. And then if OpenAI went out of business, ran out of money, right, or Anthropic ran out of money, and they had to close the doors, you'd be like, okay, so what? I still have this piece of software that I run on my infrastructure that means I have access to generative AI capabilities that are near state of the art in perpetuity. As long as I keep paying the electricity bill, I still have access to these models. So these are kind of the big things: semi-autonomous stuff, learning, model convergence. We're not nowhere close to it, and open models are three things that people need to keep their eye on as to how it's going to impact the evolution of generative AI.
Awesome. One sort of concept, Chris, that I'd like to touch on as it relates to future AI trends, especially as it relates to search for either commerce or content, on-site search. What we've seen is a lot of the releases that are coming out right now are, like I mentioned a bit earlier, but they're a bit of a black box. So you turn it on, it feeds into the vector or wherever it's going, and then you get responses. There's really no tuning. There's nothing you can really adjust. Whereas we're taking a slightly different approach with HawkSearch, is we're giving the tools a little bit to our customers, and we're starting to open that door even further and further. So maybe a couple questions there. One, do you have any advice for us? And two, what do you think is the better approach and when it comes to on-site search?
So again, remember, RAG and fine tuning, giving the chef more ingredients or teaching the chef new tricks are sort of the two main approaches you can take to improving what a model can do. And having that reinforcement learning where there's a human feedback loop is probably the most valuable thing you can do, to have indicators that say, yeah, this new change or this response was a good response, this change was a bad response. A lot of companies kind of assume that AI is just set it and forget it, like it just do its thing. Like, no, you can and should be collecting data all the time and then constantly feeding that data back into typically adapters or training or new training data or new data for your vector library, so that it's always improving. Half the value of machine learning is the learning word in machine learning.
Yeah.
And if you just treat these things as static models that are not learning, then you're really not getting a lot of value. You're not getting the most value out of them that you could be. So for any company that wants to do on-site search better, I mean, that would be an important consideration, is how are you integrating that human feedback? What signals are you using? About 2 months ago, Google had a little bit of a leak, and their content warehouse API got leaked, which was their central data store that they use for most of their search results, most of their recommendation engines, most of their AI stuff. And Rand Fishkin over at SparkToro first documented this and then pointed everyone towards the actual archive where you could look at the raw data itself. And you see in there just how much reinforcement learning there is, taking into account all these different signals, so that Google search is constantly learning from user interactions, what people click on, right? Depending on which browser they're in, whether it's social posts. And we don't know the weights of the models, aka how much each factor matters, but we do know that there are a lot of things in there, some of which Google previously denied as being true, but that's a whole separate story. But they clearly say this is a reinforcement learning model.
Yeah. And Chris, I have another kind of question, because obviously for some of our customer base, training a model, that sounds like a pretty daunting task. But last time we talked, you had mentioned the phrase LoRa.
Yes.
Do you mind explaining what that is? Yeah.
So LoRa stands for low rank adapter. If you think about training a model, the traditional way is you would take a model and take a whole bunch of training data, and you're gonna retrain that model. You're gonna say, here's some new weights. This word appears to this word more often here, so change your interpretation. That is a very costly and time-consuming process. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of hardware. It's very expensive. There are newer methodologies like LoRa's that allow you to essentially, it almost behaves like a plugin. If you've ever used Adobe Photoshop or Premiere, you bought a plugin, you just plug the thing in, and now it has a new capability. That's kind of what a LoRa does with a language model. You would take a base model like Llama 3.1, then you would have a LoRa that your system architecture would have that is trained on your specific thing, and you just add that in. So if you had a very competent chef and you just gave the chef a new cookbook, right? The chef's like, oh, okay. I mean, I guess you put the oven at this temperature instead of this temperature, use the muffin method instead of the creaming method. Okay, I got it. As long as the base chef is competent and versatile, which today's foundation models are, then the LoRa, aka the new cookbook, teaches the chef new things, but doesn't require you to get a whole new chef, which is really important. And so that type of training is possible, can be done today at much lower costs, and it improves the quality of what the model can do for your specific use case. And there's a whole discipline of very technical things like direct preference optimization, self-play preference optimization for building these things that allow you to approach it with different strategies as to how much weight, for example, one signal should have in the retraining. But that can, in some cases, help a model behave more the way you want it to behave.
Awesome. Well, as we at HawkSearch start to open the door for our customers to be able to modify the responses and the Gen AI and all the cool things we have going on, certainly one thing we need to take into consideration and help our customers tune the results to their needs, really, and to make sure it's not too daunting to go in and make these changes, if that makes sense. And I think we have, and we have one last slide here, Chris, some common AI pitfalls. What do you got for us?
I'm going to ask you a very complex question.
Uh-oh. Okay.
You ready?
I don't know.
What is ethics?
What is ethics? Ooh. Well, we can just ask ChatGPT, can't we, Chris?
You can, but I'm asking you.
All right. Well, ethics, let's take a shot at this. Ethics is sort of a moral, I guess, path in which we abide by in like human law, we'll say. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's a very muddled definition because
of course.
Well, in fairness to you, I know I put you on the spot. In fairness to
Yeah.
you, ethics is an academic discipline of its own, and there's
Mhm.
3 levels of ethics, and we'll talk about how this gets to AI.
Mhm.
There is meta ethics, which is understanding the very foundations of what good and evil is, what right and wrong is, right? So, what makes something good or evil? That's meta ethics. Then in the middle, you have something called normative ethics. Normative ethics is sort of 3 branches of how do you know something is good or bad. And there is what's called deontology, which says the rules are inherently good. If you are a Muslim, the Quran is inherently good, right? The rules are the rules. There is virtue ethics, which say your character, who you are as a human being, determines good or evil. How you approach things, the intent with which you do something determines good or evil. If you intend to cause harm, that's bad. And then there's consequentialism, which is the 3rd branch of ethics, which says the outcome is what matters. The ends justify the means. If you created more good than harm, it was ethical. How this applies to AI is really important because a lot of people don't understand ethics to begin with, and B, then don't know how to approach the use of AI from an ethical perspective. Which of those 3 normative branches does your company, your personal work adhere to? Most AI companies go with the consequentialist approach, which is, did you break any laws? Okay, well, that was bad. Did you hurt people and you didn't have to? Well, that was bad. However, those other branches exist for a reason because different parts of societies interact differently. So if you are, say, a Shia Muslim or you're a Sunni Muslim, you have very different related ethical frameworks about what is right and wrong. If you are using AI, you might disagree with what a Silicon Valley tech bro decides is ethical in a model, right? If you're working with a company like HawkSearch and you want to say, I don't want to see some products because they conflict with my ethics, with my values and virtues, does a model support that? Or does a model have a very generic ethical framework that violates people's individual ethics? So these are some of the things that people have to give a lot of thought to about what does ethics mean? Do you know what it means? How do you apply it within your work? And then with AI in particular, how does it impact AI? So you have on the slide here bias in AI models. Some kinds of bias are considered acceptable. Other kinds of bias are not, right? It is considered acceptable to make biased decisions, for example, on household income, right? You're allowed to say, I'm not going to give you a loan because you don't make enough money. Other things we call, in America, we call them protected classes. You're not allowed to make decisions on. You're not allowed to say, you appear to be Korean. I'm not going to give you a loan. That's not okay, right? So part of bias goes back to ethics and to say, what are the rules? Are the rules inherently good? Or what are the outcomes? And are the outcomes inherently good or evil? How do we encode that into AI systems so that systems are behaving with ethics and laws that we have? This is a long and deep and complicated subject, but the most important single thing that any person can do in any AI system is to ask one question: what could go wrong, right? And to answer that question seriously and thoughtfully. What could go wrong? How could this be misused? How could this be misinterpreted? How could this have, what unintended consequences could this have? And to your point, Kyle, saying let's ask ChatGPT is actually a good idea, to give it something and say, what are the unintended consequences of this? For example, this is a legislative thing. I took a piece of legislation that was being offered up in a state in the US and I said, what are the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation? And it spit back, hey, here's some things that could go wrong. Back in the 1990s, America passed an amendment to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and saying, and it changed. It was supposed to improve the quality of life in the workplace for people with disabilities. The unintended consequence, because nobody asked the question, what could go wrong, was people stopped hiring people with disabilities at all. They said, we don't want to make reasonable accommodations, so we're just going to find a reason to not hire you in the first place. And the number of people with disabilities in the workplace who were employed dropped like a rock because no one asked the question, what could go wrong? Today's generative AI tools can help us answer those questions, and it is incumbent upon all of us, users, vendors, system builders, AI experts, to be asking that question all the time.
Awesome. Well, I didn't know I was getting an ethical presentation today, but I really appreciate it. And I learned a couple new things. But the most important thing is to ask what could go wrong. And really quick on that, I know we only have 5 minutes left here, Chris. This is going to be my last question. And we'll see if there was some actual questions or if we just have seat questions. But I was just going to ask you, so if we're going to say what could go wrong, if we're thinking about what we talked about before, concept and visual image search, where we're only querying, it's the RAG model. If you were to ask yourself that question, if we're just querying on customer product data, what do you think the answer would be?
It depends. It depends on what's in the product data, right? So is there stuff in the product data that you wouldn't want the customer seeing? Could you have accidentally included data from your catalog that isn't supposed to be there, right? Maybe you have a product catalog and you've got a bunch of products marked do not sell, but for some reason there was a data quality issue. And of course, now that's in there and customers are being recommended products that don't exist anymore or were discontinued, or hey, that's been recalled because it causes your house to catch on fire. Any of those, at any point in the operational chain from idea to implementation with generative AI, you can get bad data, you can get bad questions, you can get bad models, you can get bad routers, and all along the way there's a bunch of things that can go wrong. It's like having a car. From the moment you get into the car to you get your destination, there's a bunch of things that can go wrong. Our job as vendors and as developers is to ask that question and try to mitigate as many of those things as possible. In the airline industry, if you go to any plane, in the cockpit is this thing called the Quick Reference Handbook, the QRH. And it is a long list of checklists of things that go wrong. And the Pilots Association has an expression for that. Everything in that book is written in blood because it is things that have gone wrong in the past that got people killed. And so you now have this book, which is literally a holy book in some ways, of here's what can go wrong and here's how we're going to adjust it. What is the QRH for your business, for your search product, for your customers and the way they interact with your business? When a customer opens up a customer chat and they say, hey, I got the wrong product or whatever, is there a QRH that a customer service representative can say, let me fix this for you and we'll get you squared away? If you have that is also the blueprint for generative AI agents to be able to do exactly the same thing.
There you go. You don't want to be building the airplane while you're flying it, right, Chris?
Just not
a good idea. Yeah. And two specific things that I can think of for at least our customer base. Of course, the most important thing is customer part numbers, and basically anything that relates to the B2B side of commerce. But there's customer specific part numbers, there's specific customer data in there. And then the most important one is specific pricing.
Price is a big one.
Certain customers.
The other thing is there are some industries that will need your help to even choose a model that can work with their catalog. So I've done some work in the lab products industry. There are some chemicals that certain language models will not talk about. They're like, nope, that's dangerous, can't talk about it. And you're like, but this is the legitimate use case. So a company like HawkSearch, is going to be the ones that to essentially tune around those issues, so that those customers with valid use cases can get the benefit of generative AI.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I think we're almost at time here. I know we've basically done Q&A the whole way through, but I really appreciate you jumping on with us today, and kind of marrying generative AI and search. And thanks for throwing me that ethical curveball. But outside of that, we really, really appreciate you joining. And we appreciate everyone else joining on LinkedIn and YouTube or wherever else. But thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You have a great day. Everyone who's watching, have a great day. And scan the QR code if you'd like to learn some more.